Mr. Speaker, I'd firstly like to wish a Happy New Year to the member who's resumed her seat. The last time I saw her was on Indian Republic Day, where at the Aotea Centre she and the regional Party-chicks of the National Party were on stage in front of a scant crowd of around 200 people drawn together by a front organisation, the so-called United Indians, which has since been disowned by the reputable bodies of the Indian community. And I think National is embarrassed about the manipulation of community organisations when 3,000 Indians turned up at the Bharatiya Samaj function in South Auckland, and there were more National Party flunkies at the Aotea Centre than there were genuine representatives of the ethnic community. But sir, back to the issue of the day, and New Zealanders are asking themselves the question about Big Tuesday. Is that it? Is that really the best National can do after a decade to think about it and 15 months in office, proving Alan Bollard right that there is no plan to catch Australia? If raising GST on thousands of ordinary New Zealanders is the answer, Kiwis are asking what on earth was the question? What was the question if that was the answer? Surely it can't be to make the tax system fairer, because as Labor said from the outset, dropping the top tax rate and paying for it by raising GST is the precise opposite of fair to ordinary New Zealanders. Surely it can't be to make New Zealand more productive, to benefit the real economy, because National has ruled out all of the options put up by the tax working group that would thoroughly address the property bubble, leaving only the removal of depreciation rates. By virtually ruling out all those steps, they've left themselves with no fiscal wiggle room, unless, of course, there's the old arsenic or castor oil trick. Instead of the arsenic of GST, on budget day we get the castor oil of a limited capital gains tax. Perhaps that, sir, is the real plan. We shall have to wait and see. Mr. Speaker, in my remarks today I'm going to provide a quick summary of our rebuttal of the National Plan, concentrating on the proposed tax changes, and set out Labor's three-way test for progressive sustainable tax reform. Sir, Mr. Speaker, today was supposed to be Big Tuesday. This day, John Armstrong said, would be the day that Big John Key broke a few eggs to put New Zealand on the course with the policies the country needed. Well, sir, today the same commentator's given National 4 out of 10 for boldness. Brian Fallow, respected economic journalist, said, it's a pity that rather than grasping the tax lever, he barely crooked his little finger around it. Bernard Hickey rightly called him mediocre, not a real leader, a seat warmer, told him to move on and let someone else do the job, and the team that's ready to do that is sitting here, Mr. Speaker, ready to grasp the real issues, sir. It seems the little emperor has no clothes after all. The smiling assassin was all smile and no assassination of the underlying problems in the tax system, no vision and no strategy to get us to a resilient, a productive and a truly brighter future. And no amount of flag waving, Mr. Speaker, can hide the hole in National's strategic donut. There is no there is no centrepiece. Today has proved it, sir. Sir, after the piece of fiscal genius that is the heart of that speech, sir, we are called to look at the re-release of other policies, like the famous Kopu Bridge. As my colleague has mentioned, John Key must really love holidays in Pawanui. That is, unless he doesn't like the fact that Jerry Brownlee's going to turn it into a slag heap by mining all over public land. Mr. Speaker, of course, John Key also did the perfunctory squeezing of the public service, the traditional National recipe to shrink the state so that ordinary New Zealanders who rely on the services the state can provide get less tomorrow as well as today. But, Mr. Speaker, the three-way test of whether the tax plan will succeed comes down to this. Is it fair to all New Zealanders? Does it pass the equity test? Does it solve the underlying problems? Does it pass the productivity test? And will it last? Does it pass the sustainability test? National's plan fails all three. Let's see why. Sir, the equity failure could not be more stark or obvious to all. Cutting the top tax rate to, say, 30% costs around $1.6 billion. Leapfrogging to 25 cents, getting ahead of Australia, if you like, $2.3 billion. In a deficit environment, quite rightly, the Minister of Finance says it must be fiscally neutral. So how are they going to pay for it, Mr. Speaker? Well, raising GST to 15% raises around $2 billion, but compensating ordinary New Zealanders for the regressive nature of that tax costs virtually all of it, around $1.9 billion, leaving $100 to $200 million over to fund the top tax cuts. Obviously, sir, it doesn't work. Ordinary New Zealanders are therefore quite right to be sceptical that they would be fully compensated. Mums who are trying to feed their 3 or 5 kids on a median or a low income are frightened about the cost of bread and milk, let alone power and rent. And they're right to be concerned at the fairness of it. Because for someone on the average wage, as our leader has said, 35 measly cents a week in tax relief. For someone on John Key's wage, $509, or the CEO of Telecom's wage, $2,600. The equity test is absolutely beyond question. This policy fails. So why do it, Mr. Speaker? Why raise GST? New Zealanders already, wait for it, the sixth highest in the OECD for indirect tax take as a share of total tax. 6th from the top, Mr. Speaker. We are not light on indirect taxes. From National's point of view, raising GST can only make sense if they do not fully compensate other New Zealanders. Otherwise, there will be nothing to contribute to the reduction of the top tax rate. Mr. Speaker, National's plan fails the productivity test. It does not sufficiently address the structural problems, and here's why. Firstly, surprise, surprise, no mention in Mr. Key's speech at all of closing down the rorts, of plugging the tax avoidance and tax planning loopholes around LAQCs, trusts and pies. Didn't get a mention, sir, not once. Didn't get a mention, but the tax working group highlighted it as a fundamental problem. Secondly, as I've said, he ruled out nearly all of the measures that would address the property bubble, which everybody accepts is wrong, that there's a tax incentive to invest in real estate speculation rather than in things that we can actually export and sell. And that's making New Zealand poorer, Mr. Speaker. But, sir, he's ruled out nearly all the tools in the toolbox. The only one left is depreciation on buildings, and at $1.3 billion, it doesn't raise enough to solve the problem. Hence, perhaps, the deep, dark budget secret of 2010 is actually a partial capital gains tax instead of GST. We shall have to wait and see. Mr. Speaker, to quote Bernard Hickey, John Key is saying tough. My backers own property. We won, you lost, eat that. I don't like it, but I'm not brave enough to challenge it. He's finally shown his true colours, says Bernard Hickey. He is a mediocre leader without the vision or the ability to change New Zealand. He's a seat warmer. And last time I checked, Sir, Bernard Hickey was not a member of the Labour Party. So, Mr. Speaker, this fails the final test too, the sustainability test. Labour offered National a gold-plated get-out-of-jail-free card. We said right from the start, if you want to make New Zealand better, we will honour that with a bipartisan discussion, and we will work constructively and in good faith to do that job with you, provided it's a two-way street, and provided you don't just jack up just to fund the cut to the top rate. And what did they do? They ignored the offer of a sustainable plan, and they did exactly what we said they shouldn't do, raise GST in order to fund the mates rates at the top. It's a two-fingered salute to bipartisanship, sir, and New Zealand will be the poorer because when we are inevitably occupying the Treasury benches, sir, we will have to change this back. And we will do it for the good of all New Zealanders, and we, sir, will make a policy that is equitable, that does support the real economy and is sustainable for the future of New Zealand. Today was Big Tuesday. No, it wasn't. It was barely timid Tuesday, tiny Tuesday.